A single glove, blackened with ink, and the scent of guilt. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I'm Vela. I love hearing from you all. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your words make every mystery unforgettable. Sherlock Holmes had never kept regular hours. He treated time as a violinist treats silence, useful only when it could be shaped. That damp November morning found him at the window of Baker Street, his sharp profile cut against a pall of London fog, while Watson, who had returned from an early call on a patient in Marylebone, dried a sleeve that had gathered a constellation of cold smut along the cuff. "You have taken a hansom whose driver professes himself reformed," Holmes remarked without turning. "He has replaced whiskey with peppermints and bought a second-hand lap rug that sheds more than it warms. However," and here Holmes's nose lifted with mild disgust, "his pipe is Turkish and is packed with an atrocious mixture that stains the fingers a bluish tinge. You paid with silver, not copper." Watson laughed, for one could either resent such clairvoyance or enjoy it. "It is singular that you know the matter of silver. You carry no small change. The apothecary in Dorset Street relieved you of it last evening. Your pocket bulges with a prescription roll and the corners are crimped, precisely what a shilling kept flat would prevent." He flicked a look at Watson's cuff. "And those smuts are from Paddington Road, where the metropolitan locomotives leave a more generous soot than charity from a bishop." Before Watson could reply, Mrs. Hudson's accustomed knock was followed by the rustle and shuffle of more than one visitor upon the stairs. A moment later, Inspector Lestrade came brisk and neat into the room, hat already in hand, with a man behind him whose clothes were too carefully chosen for comfort. A polished frock coat, a silk hat dulled by damp, and a face as pale and polished as his cuffs. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," Lestrade began, "I don't pretend to like needing you, but needs must. This is Sir Lionel Harbury, Under-Secretary at the Home Office." Sir Lionel's bow was perfunctory, as if acknowledging an unpleasant necessity. "Mr. Holmes, a matter of ghastly urgency has fallen upon my household. My private secretary, Mr. Arthur Quill, was discovered dead in my study an hour past." His voice faltered on that final word, and he compressed his lips to a bloodless line. Holmes gestured them to chairs and resumed his own with a cat-like ease. "You did not summon a doctor first?" "A physician was called, of course," Lestrade put in. "Dr. Ellison of Wimpole Street. He can't certify cause. There are no wounds to speak of, no struggle. The room is in order. If it is poison, it is not one that advertises itself. And there is a curiosity." At this, Holmes's eyes warmed. "Pray continue." Sir Lionel glanced at the inspector and then at his gloved hands, which twitched against each other. A single glove lay upon the carpet near the escritoire, not Mr. Quill's. A black kid glove, the right hand. The inside of it was stained with ink. "The ink," he added with a shiver of distaste, "seems to have marked Mr. Quill's fingers as well." Watson, in spite of himself, felt the familiar quickening that the word curiosity always summoned in Holmes. The little oddments of life, an ash-flake, a scuff-mark, a torn tassel, were to his friend the very alphabet of human conduct. "Describe the study," said Holmes. "Light, draughts, entrances, and neighbours." "Ground floor," Lestrade replied. "Front of the house looking onto Harley Street. Heavy curtains, one sash window. It was unlatched but not raised. Door opened from the hall, no back exit. Fire laid but unlit. The lamps had been turned up. The maid swears she left them low. No sign of forced entry. We have the footman's statement that no callers were received this morning prior to the discovery." "And Mr. Quill's status in the household?" Sir Lionel sat forward. "He was with me 3 years, a sober, industrious fellow. He managed my correspondence, drafts, the copying press. He kept my keys when I was away." A flush rose in the Under-Secretary's cheek. "Mr. Holmes, I need not say that any hint of scandal will be seized upon by men eager to damage the ministry." Holmes steepled his fingers. "So you do have enemies who read the Gazette? That is helpful. What of the glove? You say it was the right hand, black kid, inked within. Was its mate in the room?" "No," said Lestrade. "We searched." "Size?" "Small," Lestrade answered. "Too small for the deceased, more like a lady's, though not dainty. The fingers are narrow, but the wrist is long." "Ah." Holmes rose in one fluid motion and reached for his hat and coat. "Watson, your bag. Sir Lionel, you will accompany us, if you please. Lestrade, keep your men out of the study until I have seen it. Every half-competent crime is dressed up like a wax figure, smooth, lifelike, handsome, until you look behind the ear and see where the hair is stuck on. I will look behind the ear." The fog had thickened by the time they secured a cab, turning the city to a ghostly procession of gaslit blurs. Sir Lionel gave his directions in a low voice and sat rigid, his gloved fingers beating a silent tattoo upon his knee. Holmes, head bent, watched the play of those fingers as if they were telegraph keys. Once he leaned forward and drew from the Under-Secretary's sleeve a minuscule shred of blue thread. He rolled it between finger and thumb without comment. At Harley Street, a sombre housemaid with red eyes led them to a handsome study that spoke of order, money, and the habit of decision. The air held a faint tang of lamp oil and the sweeter, ironed smell of paper. On the carpet beside the mahogany escritoire lay the glove, black, slightly glossy, its interior a dull bruise of violet where wet ink had soaked and dried. Near it a square of blotting paper stood in a wooden frame. The surface was a freckled galaxy of letters. Arthur Quill lay on the rug, his head tipped awry against the fender. He was a man in his 30s, sandy hair brushed lank from a high brow, spectacles fallen a little to one side. His hands were ink-shadowed at the tips, but otherwise his clothing was flawless. No blood, no bruise upon the temple that would have made the matter convenient. Watson knelt at once, feeling for the signs that training and habit look for when hope is absurd. Lividity, rigidity, the temperature that tells you how long the world has been without a man. 2 hours, perhaps a little more, he murmured. There is no froth upon the lips, no odour of almonds, no constriction of the pupils beyond what one sees in common collapse. Holmes, meanwhile, hovered above the scene without touching it, his gaze taking in angles and shadows. The unlatched window with a crescent of moisture upon the sash, the lamp wicks turned full, the narrow trail of faint shoe chalk where a boot had skimmed the hearth tile, the faintest impression upon the heavy pile carpet where a chair might have once stood and did not now. He knelt by the glove and peered within, drawing from his pocket lens and tweezers. A dot of crusted pigment flaked free upon the glass, violet, but with a metallic lustre like peacock sheen. "The ink is no ordinary blue-black," he said softly. "An aniline copying ink, I think, used with a press, as Sir Lionel suggested. Observe, Watson, how it has stained the inner seam rather than the exterior. Whoever wore the glove pressed the fingers hard around something wet from within outward. And look, this wrinkle." He flattened the glove upon the escritoire and indicated with his lens a faint diagonal crease at the base of the forefinger. "From the repeated closing of a lever," Holmes continued, "something like the handle of a small press, or—" He broke off and glanced at the blotter. "Sir Lionel, who operates your copying press?" "Mr. Quill chiefly," Sir Lionel said. He was meticulous. No letter passed without a pressed copy. Holmes's eyes flicked to a tray of sealing wafers, to a small steel seal whose face bore the Harbury crest reversed, to the open ledger upon the desk. With the delicacy of a surgeon, he shifted the blotter frame. Beneath it, A second sheet of blotting paper lay fresh and white, too white for a room lived in. He lifted it with tweezers. Its underside was smudged violet. "Lestrade," he said lightly, "it interests me that the lamp is turned high in daylight, that a window is unlatched in fog, and that a man whose trade is ink stains his fingers within a glove. The world does not always announce itself, but it rarely lies altogether." Lestrade's mouth tightened. "You think it
Murder? I think it is consummate tidiness," Holmes replied, "which is another word for deception. Watson, you see the smear on the nail of the forefinger. It is not the mark of a pen, but of a finger pressed upon saturated paper. And yet—" He paused, sniffed, and inclined his head toward the grate. "There is a sweetness in the air that does not belong to lamp oil or paper, not almonds, not chloroform, something else." A footman appeared at the threshold, hesitant. "Begging your pardon, Sir Lionel, but Miss Evelina has returned and asks if she may—" "Not now," Sir Lionel snapped, then coloured, smoothing his waistcoat. To Holmes in a lower voice, "My niece. She is attached to Mr. Quilwas." This will be a blow. Holmes's gaze did not alter. He might have been considering the weather. "Everyone must be admitted who had honest business with Mr. Quill," he said. "But no one will touch the desk, Lestrade. Place a man at the window and one at the door. Sir Lionel, if there were letters expected today for your hand, I should like to know it." "There was one," Sir Lionel said after a moment. "From a certain Mr. Herndale, a publisher. It concerned proofs for an anonymous tract. Nothing of consequence." "Anonymous tracts," murmured Holmes, "have been known to topple ministries." He straightened, and the keen light that meant his mind had closed upon something glittered briefly in his eyes. "For the present, we will proceed as if Mr. Quill were too neat by half, and as if someone else were neater still." He turned the glove over again, noting the faintest trace of fine grit embedded in the damp-dried ink, a telltale sparkle like ground glass. Watson felt, as he often did at the beginning of Holmes's cases, the sensation that he was standing at the lip of a maze whose map his friend already half possessed. The study was quiet save for the distant clop of hooves and the soft rattle of a passing coster's cart. Outside, London breathed through the fog. Inside, the black glove lay like a fallen sentence that no one yet understood. Miss Evelina entered with that tentative boldness which grief sometimes lends to the young. She was slight and pale, with the steady eyes of one accustomed to self-command, but sorrow had unstitched the neat seam of her composure, and a single lock had sprung loose against her temple. In her right hand she still clutched a gauze veil, though she had forgotten to lower it. Her left bare hand was tightened upon a small vinaigrette of chased silver. As her gaze fell upon the figure upon the rug, she made a small sound, not a cry, but a checked intake, and took a single step as if to kneel. Holmes moved almost imperceptibly and stood between her and the desk rather than the body. "You must not touch anything, Miss Harbury," he said, with a gentleness that always surprised those who mistook his coldness for cruelty. "You will help us best by
sitting so and telling us in your own words how the morning passed." She obeyed mechanically, her fingers whitening around the vinaigrette. "I was at my aunt's in Bayswater last evening. I returned an hour ago. They told me—" The hand bearing the vinaigrette trembled, and the sweet, powdery breath of it escaped the grill and mingled with the air. "I cannot believe it. Arthur, Mr. Quill, was well when I left. He promised he would send a line by noon if the matter he feared grew worse." "What matter was that?" asked Holmes, and though his tone was level, I saw the quick arrowing of his attention. He did not name it, she said miserably, only that a paper had come into his possession by mistake, a paper meant for my uncle's eyes, and that he must set right what could ruin the right man and shield the wrong. I begged him to give it to my uncle at once. He said he would make a copy first. He was very scrupulous. Holmes's glance flicked to the copying press upon its stand, the screw still slightly warm to the touch from recent friction, the dampened waste tissue beside it, the blotter's violet freckles like the Milky Way. "You wear heliotrope," he observed absently. She blinked at him through her daze. "It is my aunt's perfume. She pressed it upon me before I left. She says the fog stifles her, and the scent cheers. I scarcely notice it." "And Mr. Quill, did he admire it?" "The scent?" She coloured with surprise and shook her head. "He detested perfumes. He said they quarrel with ink." Lestrade had stationed a man at door and window, and now stood with arms folded, watching the exchange with his practical impatience. "Miss Harbury," he said, not unkindly, "you must also tell us who in this house would have known Mr. Quill's habits with the press and letters." "Anyone," she said. "The whole house knew how he lived by routine. The junior footman would joke that the press bell—" She faltered, then steadied. "Forgive me. There is a small bell on the press handle that tinkles when the screw is fully lowered. We would hear it at predictable hours." "A bell," Holmes repeated softly. He turned the handle experimentally. Faint, delicate, there came the merest tremor of sound, as if a diminutive harness rang. "And when it rang this morning—" "I was not here," she said, looking wretchedly at Sir Lionel. "Uncle?" Sir Lionel's jaw worked. "I was with the permanent secretary in Whitehall until 11. I heard nothing." Holmes's eyes were on the glove again. He slipped a folded card within it and withdrew. The interior seam printed a violet line across the pasteboard. "The inside bears the stain, the outside very little. Observe the base of the forefinger, Watson, a diagonal crease. That does not proceed from idle flexing. It is the mark of repeated pressure against a small lever. One does not commonly operate a copying press-in gloves. Unless the fingers are already inked, and the wearer wishes to avoid advertising it," I suggested. "Just so. Or unless the glove itself is used as a pad to prevent the bare skin from taking a stain. The grit within," he tipped a few sparkling grains into his palm, "is not from the street. It is too evenly fine. It is either pumice, used to prepare a coarse paper, or the glass dust sometimes found upon the felt of a well-worn press bed. Sir Lionel, has your press recently been refelted?" "I could not say," said Sir Lionel helplessly. "Mr. Quill tended to it." Holmes crouched by the blotter frame and slid the upper sheet free with his tweezers. "Watson, a candle, if you please, and hold it far. The heat will lift nothing we care to keep, but we will not scorch our bridge before we step upon it." He placed the sheet upon the desk, took up a small mirror from his pocket-case — he carries such things with a conjurer's unconcern — and dampened a corner of clean paper with water from the carafe. With a delicate rolling motion, he lifted a film of violet from the freckled blotter and laid it upon the fresh sheet. The ghost of lines and loops showed, backward, pale as breath upon glass. Holmes tipped the mirror, and the backward strokes sprang to legible semblance. "Not all," he murmured, "but enough." His eyes travelled, quick as flies over sugar. "Sir, the proofs shall not pass my hand intact until I am assured your conditions. Certain passages touching the Home Office must be mitigated. The anonymous author insists." "Ah." "Whose hand?" Lestrade demanded. "Mr. Quill's. He writes a clear, round clerk's hand with a habit of closing his A's like O's, and this is to a Mr. Herndale, as Sir Lionel predicted. "Miss Harbury, did Mr. Herndale ever call here?" "Twice," she said. "He is a civil, anxious man, always apologizing. He and Mr. Quill would talk in low voices about paper and signatures." "Paper and signatures," Holmes repeated, and his gaze darted to the seal and wafers. "You see, Watson, the steel seal is face up, but the wafer tray is one shy, and the spent disc upon the scrap in the grate bears two impressions, not one. Someone resealed a letter in haste. The lamps were turned high because fine work under fog requires it. The window unlatched, to clear, not to invite, and that sweetness which is neither almond nor chloroform, glycerin from the dampening bottle for the pressed tissues, it will, in careless hands, lend a scent to the air." He stooped over Quill's hand once more, raised the forefinger to the light, and showed me the oval of ink packed close under the nail, as if the finger had pressed upon soaked paper until the dye had insinuated itself. He pressed hard to take an impression, harder than a copyist would need, unless he wished to capture a very faint stroke. A pencil written with a hard point, upon 2 sheets, perhaps, the undersheet bearing only the ghost. He was stealing back the words that had been stolen by concealment. Miss Harbury had risen without knowing it. "Then he did what he meant," she whispered. "He copied what would have done harm." Holmes's look softened a fraction. "He tried. Whether he succeeded remains to be seen." He set the transposed ghost aside and reached for the press book, a stout volume with tissue leaves half transparent. The most recent page was still faintly damp. Upon it in violet lay the mirror shadow of a letter. Holmes read in silence, then made a small sound of satisfaction without triumph. "Portions only, the rest is faint to vanishing. Enough to learn that the anonymous tract accuses a senior official, by name, of selling advance notice of police raids to a certain syndicate, a name that I will not pronounce in this room until I have proof enough to drown it." Lestrade's eyes brightened with the scent of quarry. "Who is the senior official?" Holmes replaced the book gently. "The author is careful where the copy is careless. He writes in high indignation, and in phrases that would be libellous if wrong, and ruinous if right. The name is elided by smears. Whether accident or tidying I will later determine." He looked at Sir Lionel. "You see, sir, why Mr. Quill thought to make a copy before delivering the original." Sir Lionel's face had taken on the set look of a man at once affronted and afraid. "If an infamous lie is stitched to a shred of my office, I shall tear it out publicly," he said. "If it is true—" He did not finish. Holmes laid a hand for an instant upon the desk, as if feeling the pulse of the wood. "For the present, we must learn whether Mr. Herndale received or expected a packet this morning. Lestrade, send a man to his premises with a quiet word that an error may have occurred with proofs, no mention of death. And keep another at the back mews. If any gentleman develops a sudden appetite for heliotrope, I would know it." Miss Harbury started. "I told you Arthur detested perfumes." "Precisely," said Holmes. "Yet the air carries it faintly from more than your vinaigrette. The inner glove is stained, and a lady's glove it is by size and cut, but the wrist is longer than fashion, and the stitch looser, made for service, not show. If a lady came here, she was no drawing-room ornament. If a man wore it, he borrowed in haste. Either way, something too neat occurred. Mr. Quill was very tidy. His murderer, if murderer there is tidier still." He looked once more at the unlatched window, where a crescent of moisture had dried to mist. "Watson, gather your bag. We will pay our respects to Mr. Herndale after we have asked the housemaid 3 questions, the footman 2 and the charwoman 1. The first hour in a house tells you what the family has learned to ignore." As we turned to go, the little bell of the press gave the faintest jingle from our passing, as if some small spirit wished to speak. Holmes paused, listened, and smiled without mirth. You see? Even the machines volunteer their evidence if one gives them the courtesy of silence. The interviews with the servants yielded, as Holmes had predicted, an orchestra of minor notes, each one insignificant alone, but together forming the first outline of melody. The housemaid, a timid girl with cracked hands and reddened eyes, declared that she had dusted the study at 7:30 that morning, finding it neat as a prayer book and the lamp wicks trimmed low. The footman had carried in Sir Lionel's post at 8, seen Mr. Quill at his desk, and been told sharply to close the door behind him. The charwoman, who came only on Fridays, mentioned that a gentle-smelling lady had passed her in the hall near 10 o'clock. No hat, only a dark veil and gloves that left black smudges when she steadied herself against the banister. Holmes let each statement fall into place with the patient gravity of a chess player setting pieces for the opening. "You perceive, Watson," he murmured as we left the house. "The hour of death narrows to a span scarcely longer than the life of a candle. From 8 to 10 the man was alone. By 10:30 he was dead. Between those marks lies our assassin, or our accident, if one can conceive of accident so punctilious." We hailed a cab and turned toward Fleet Street, where Mr. Herndale's publishing offices lay wedged among a row of print shops and stationers. The fog had thinned, replaced by a drizzle that painted the cobbles with streaks of pewter light. Holmes sat silent, his eyes half closed, the lean lines of his face sharpened by reflection. I knew that silence. It was not thought but concentration, the tightening of the bow before the string sings. Herndale proved to be a nervous, balding man who greeted us in a room littered with proofs and smelling of printer's ink. "Yes, yes, dreadful affair," he cried before we had spoken. "Poor Quill. He promised the corrected pages by noon. The messenger returned with nothing but confusion from Harley Street." "Then you expected the proofs this morning?" Holmes asked mildly. "Certainly. We sent them out last evening. Page Galleys of the Integrity of Office, a political pamphlet by an author who insists upon remaining unnamed. Passionate fellow, though a trifle reckless in phrasing. Mr. Quill was to compare certain alterations requested by Sir Lionel himself." Holmes's brows lifted by the breadth of a hair. "By Sir Lionel? You are sure of that?" "His private note accompanied the packet. Here." Herndale rummaged among the litter and produced a half-sheet bearing the Under-Secretary's firm signature. The ink was violet. "You see? He required that paragraph 3 on page 6 be softened, the sale of information within departments, and so forth. A perfectly reasonable caution." Holmes studied the sheet through his lens. "This ink, where was it written?" "Why, on his own stationery, I presume. It arrived sealed with the Harbury crest." "Sealed?" Holmes repeated softly. "May I see the cover?" Herndale looked abashed. "I fear I destroyed it. Habit, you understand. I had no notion of its interest." "Then tell me, Mr. Herndale, who fetched the packet from your office?" "A young man, not one of my clerks. He brought Sir Lionel's note as authority and signed the receipt A. Quill. I thought nothing of it, since the handwriting matched previous examples." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Describe him." Herndale hesitated. Of middle height, clean-shaven, wearing a black overcoat with a velvet collar. He kept his right hand gloved and held it somewhat stiffly as though injured. I noticed a faint scent, pleasant, flowery, odd in a man. "Heliotrope?" Holmes asked. "Yes, that may be it." When we emerged into the street again, Holmes's face was alight with that dangerous serenity which always presaged discovery. "Watson,"
he said. "We are dealing with a person who impersonated Quill yesterday evening, obtained the pamphlet proofs, and returned them this morning after some manipulation. The ink of Sir Lionel's note is the same violet aniline as that within the glove. A forgery, most delicate and daring. Mr. Quill discovered the deceit while copying the pages, sought to preserve evidence, and paid with his life." "But how, Holmes? There was no wound, no sign of poison?" He hailed another cab and motioned me in before replying. "We shall let the chemistry of Harley Street answer that. There is a reagent for every mystery, my dear fellow, if one knows where to apply it." We reached Baker Street by 3 o'clock. The fire was rekindled, the atmosphere faintly redolent of tobacco and ozone. Holmes unlocked his cabinet and drew out a small case of files and filters. From my bag he requested a smear scraped from the ink on the glove's interior. He dissolved it in spirit and added a drop of clear liquid from another bottle. Instantly the mixture turned a lurid crimson. "Prussiate of mercury," he said. "A copying ink adulterated with mercuric salt. It yields a finer sheen, but to the unwary who handle it in quantity, particularly when absorbed through the skin, it is death. Our murderer soaked the glove in it, knowing Quill would use it to operate the press or to handle damp sheets. Within minutes, the poison entered the bloodstream, silent, efficient, and tidy. I felt a chill at the ingenuity. Then it was no accident at all. None whatever. The false Quill delivered the proofs, arranged that the victim should handle them, and left the poisoned glove to complete the work. When the true Quill died, the forger reclaimed his packet, or attempted to, before discovery. But something interrupted him.
Perhaps the sound of a servant. Perhaps Miss Harbury's unexpected return. Holmes crossed to the window and stared out into the gathering dusk. The elegance of the method argues intellect. The forged handwriting argues access. The perfume argues either a woman or a man who traffics with one. And the glove, the glove. Its size tells us the hand was smaller than Quill's, but not delicate. There are few such hands in political London. A knock at the door broke his meditation. Lestrade entered, dripping rain. "We've been to Herndale's, Mr. Holmes. Your messenger beat us by an hour, I gather. My man at Harley Street says a stranger called around noon, asking for Sir Lionel, left when told he was out. Description tallies with your forger, medium height, velvet-collared coat, and a carriage waiting at the corner." "Excellent, Lestrade. You are, as ever, punctual after the event. Did your man note the carriage number?" "He did. 1427H. Holmes smiled thinly. "Belonging, if I mistake not, to Mr. Edward Crail of the Civil Service Gazette, a journalist with more curiosity than conscience. He has printed insinuations about the Home Office before. Let us see if he is now brave enough to print his own confession. We found Mr. Crail at his club off the Strand, reading proofs by the fire. He was a broad-shouldered fellow with the florid complexion of one who keeps late hours and loud company. When Holmes introduced himself, the man's pen halted mid-stroke. "You wish to speak of Mr. Quill?" Holmes said quietly. "I advise frankness. Scotland Yard already knows of your evening errand to Harley Street." Crail's eyes flickered. "I went to collect a letter, that's all. Herndale told me the matter concerned Sir Lionel's revisions. If Quill's dead, I know nothing of it." Holmes regarded him with mild curiosity. "Then permit me to enlighten you. The letter you carried was a counterfeit, written in violet aniline ink, compounded with mercury. You delivered death as neatly as a postman delivers bread. The question is, who brewed the ink?" The journalist's face drained of colour. "Good God, man, you can't mean... I didn't..." Holmes raised a hand. "I mean precisely that you were used. Someone supplied you the forged note trusting to your vanity to play errand boy. When Quill saw the fraud, he sought to expose it. Find me the hand that directed you, and I may spare you the gallows. Crail swallowed hard, eyes darting. A woman brought it, said she was a messenger from Sir Lionel himself, wore a veil, spoke low. I took her word, why shouldn't I? She paid well. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Did she wear perfume? Yes, something like yes, heliotrope. Holmes drew a slow breath. Watson, he said softly, our circle closes by degrees. We began with a glove too small for a man, scented with heliotrope, and a death wrought by mercury ink. We end with a veiled
lady who commissions a forgery. The identity of that lady will tell us who profits by Sir Lionel's ruin and who loved Mr. Quill enough to kill him or too little to let him live. He turned back to Crail, his voice suddenly fierce. You will remain at your club under guard until I send word. Attempt to flee, and not even your editor will print your obituary kindly. As we stepped once more into the rain-silvered street, I saw the strange light in Holmes's eyes, the flame that glowed only when his mind was upon the scent. Come, Watson, he said, buttoning his coat. We have one call to make before the night is done. The lady who wears heliotrope does not sleep easily, and the ink upon her conscience is not yet dry. The address Holmes gave the cabman took us westward through a rain that stitched the air into grey net, the lamps pricking through like beads. Miss Harbury's aunt, Mrs. Beckwith, received us in a drawing-room of teacups, antimacassars, and a determined cheerfulness that cracked only when Holmes spoke Arthur Quill's name. If grief had hollowed Evelina, anxiety had sharpened her aunt. She peered at us over a thimble as if we were an awkward seam to be set straight. You were so good to come, she said. Evelina is with Sir Lionel by now. He sent for her. Poor child, she left here at 11:30. Holmes inclined his head. We shall not detain you long, madam. Miss Harbury told us she wore heliotrope at your urging. Mrs. Beckwith, taken aback, gave a short laugh. My little indulgence. The fog is oppressive, and a drop of scent is a curtain against it. The bottle is there upon the chimney-piece, Gadsby's. I dare say half the county wears the same. He crossed and lifted the cut-glass flask to his nostrils, then set it down with a small, pleased motion. Just so? I regret to ask a practical question. Who else here favours it? My companion, Miss Pride, does, she said. Agnes is devoted to it, and to a dozen other economies I cannot break her of. She says the fragrance masks the shop smell upon her gloves after her errands. She keeps herself too busily employed for my taste. She was out very early this morning and again after breakfast. Early? At what hour? Before 8. She's industrious, sir, not idle. She earns a little besides her allowance by typing for a law writer off Holborn. One must not despise honest work. Mrs. Beckwith sighed in a tone that suggested she very much did. This morning she promised to be back by 10. She returned at a little after, which was unlike her. She was flurried and asked for tea. Then she went out again. Holmes's glance moved to a side table where a thin pair of black kid gloves lay to dry upon newspaper. He lifted the right-hand glove by a single finger, examined the long wrist and the looser stitch at the hem, and replaced it so precisely that not a droplet of rain slid from it. Miss Pride's?
I believe so. Agnes keeps several such pairs. She is particular in her habits and not sentimental in the least. She will throw them away when the dye stains her fingers. I tell her the ink mark is the badge of honest labour, but she is fastidious. Indeed. Might I? Holmes asked, and without waiting for permission, turned the glove's mouth to the light. Along the interior seam ran a faint bruise of violet, as if a ghost of colour had been captured there and could not escape. He touched the seam with one fingernail and lifted away a glittering dust that caught the firelight like ground glass. When he spoke again, his tone was the one he uses when setting a chessman and saying nothing of check. "You mentioned errands," he said. "Among them, does Miss Pride frequent a perfumer's or a glove shop?" Mrs. Beckwith blinked. "She stopped at Lewin's in Oxford Street only yesterday for gloves. I remember because she complained that the long wrists do not sit properly under a jacket sleeve. As for perfume, the girl would sooner buy paper and pens. The heliotrope is mine. She borrows it." Holmes's long hand flicked toward the sewing basket at Mrs. Beckwith's elbow. "You work with blue thread, madam. Might I see it?" She obliged, and he drew out a loose end, holding it to the window's ashy light. It was a bright ultramarine, very similar to the single shred he had pinched from Sir Lionel's sleeve in Harley Street. I saw the same thought pass through his mind and felt that small internal click I have come to recognize. The sound to me of two pieces locking. He returned the thread and turned to the maid who had answered the door to us. "Mary, is it? You assisted Miss Pride with her veil this morning?" "Yes, sir," the girl said, colouring. "She said to fetch the black lace." She did not take a hat, only the veil. "She said the fog made a hat ridiculous." "And she wore her black gloves?" "Yes, sir, only—" The girl hesitated, twisting her apron. "Beggin' pardon." When she come back near 10, her gloves had black on 'em as if they'd rubbed a stove grate. I took 'em down to dry. Holmes nodded as if the orchestra had struck the note he had been waiting for. "You are extremely helpful, Mary. Mrs. Beckwith, we are obliged. If Miss Pride returns, do not permit her to quit the house until you have first rung my rooms in Baker Street. Say nothing of our visit, I beg." Mrs. Beckwith's lips tightened. "Agnes is no criminal, Mr. Holmes." "I hope you are right," said Holmes gravely. "I seldom hope as strongly." In the cab again he let the blind fall and sat with his fingertips pressed together. A right-hand glove with a long wrist, dyed at the seam with violet ink. An early errand, a return at 10, a veil instead of a hat, heliotrope to throw one off the scent or to lay it. And note, Watson, our ultramarine thread. It is far from conclusive, but it tells us that Sir Lionel and Miss Pride have at least brushed sleeves of late. You imagine an intrigue? "I imagine a corridor," said Holmes, "in which two figures pass in haste and share a draught of air. Come, we will not chase shadows along Bayswater pavements when there is a bureau in Holborn that hires sunlight by the hour." The typewriting rooms in question lay up 2 flights of narrow stairs above a law stationer's, their door marked in gilt letters. Pride and Company, copying, typewriting, and transcription. The buzz and tick of machines met us like the hum of a hive. A young clerk at a high desk recognized Holmes instantly and flushed with both pride and alarm. "Mr. Holmes, Miss Pride is engaged, if it is business." "It is life and death," Holmes said softly. "May I pass?" The clerk faltered and stood aside. In the inner room, half-parted screens revealed 4 women at their machines, their hands pattering with that curious, detached delicacy of skilled typists. At the far desk sat a woman in a dark serge jacket. Her hair was drawn back severely beneath a small net, and a black veil lay folded beside the blotter like a shed skin. She looked up, and though she mastered herself well, the shadow of fear that crossed her clear, strong features was unmistakable. "Miss Pride?" Holmes said, bowing. "I am Sherlock Holmes. The name may save us an hour if it spares us pretense." "I know your name," she said. Her voice had a steadiness that cost her. "If this is about Sir Lionel's niece, she is safe." I saw her only yesterday." "It is about Arthur Quill," said Holmes. Her hands, which had been perfectly still, curled upon the desk until the knuckles showed. "Then you must go," she said presently, very low. "I cannot speak in here?" Holmes's smile was brief and without triumph. "On the contrary, Miss Pride, we must all speak here. You were in Harley Street this morning shortly after 10. A charwoman observed a veiled lady pass her on the stairs, steadying herself against the banister and marking it with black. Your glove bears aniline ink at the inner seam, and there is press dust caught in the stitch. You went not to console Miss Harbury, but to retrieve a packet of proofs whose contents threaten a man you serve or a man you fear." Miss Pride drew one breath and then another, as if measuring them against courage. "If I deny it," she said, "you will prove it by the soles of my boots." "By the soles, by the scent, and by the thread," Holmes returned. "Spare us the arithmetic. Who sent you to Herndale last evening under Mr. Quill's name?" She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were no longer defiant but clear. "I was given a note and told to fetch the packet." The note bore Sir Lionel's hand. I took it to be his. I am not a fool, Mr. Holmes, but neither am I a chemist. I could not smell poison in the ink. "Who gave you the note?" "I found it at the bureau," she said, "in an envelope with my name. The messenger who left it wore a velvet-collared coat and would not give his own. He smelt of tobacco, and yes, heliotrope. I used your aunt's scent earlier to sweeten the rooms. If it clings to me, you may blame my economies. I went to Harley Street this morning to—" She swallowed. "To set back what I had set awry. Mr. Quill was already gone. I heard a bell ring once, a tiny bell, and then nothing. I could not bear to touch him. I took nothing. I left nothing but my own confusion on the banister." Holmes watched her with that penetrating gentleness I have seen disarm men far harder than she. "Why were you chosen, Miss Pride?" "Because I have done errands for Sir Lionel before," she said after a moment. "Copies, drafts, the silent work women do for statesmen who cannot be seen in stationers' shops. If a counterfeit of his hand were to pass any man, it would pass me. That is why they picked me." "They?" Holmes repeated. "The men who stand one door away from honour," she said. "Mr. Crail, perhaps others. They like to use a woman's footsteps for their mud, and then to call them dainty." Holmes was very still. "One last question. Did you speak with Sir Lionel after you returned?" She shook her head. "I sent a note. He has not answered." Holmes's eyes went distant for an instant, as if a quiet string had been plucked somewhere within the pattern he was weaving. "You will come with us now," he said, rising. "Not under arrest, under my protection. Lestrade will hear what you have said, and I will see that you are not made a scapegoat by the men who contrived this." As we moved toward the door, a messenger boy, damp and panting, thudded up the stairs and thrust a telegram into the clerk's hand. It was carried to Miss Pride, who broke the seal with a composure that deserted her as she read. The paper trembled between her fingers. She passed it to Holmes without a word. He scanned it and gave it to me. In stark capitals it ran: "Herndale press fires started in composing room. Stop proofs destroyed. Stop Sir Lionel requests your presence immediately." L. Holmes folded the paper once, twice. "So our tidy friend begins to tidy with flame," he said softly. "The stakes rise, Watson, and observe, Sir Lionel's signature arrives by wire when his hand fares badly in ink. Let us see which version of the man awaits us in Fleet Street." Fleet Street was a roused hornet's nest. Ink-smudged men darting like dark bees, the air prickling with smoke and indignation. We found Herndale's office with its door flung wide, the hall thronged by apprentices bearing pails and sodden armfuls of blackened paper. A sharp, acrid reek hung in the passage, the smell of char and something sweeter beneath, like a faint burnt sugar. Herndale himself, his bald scalp shining with perspiration, seized Holmes by the sleeve. "A
mischief maker, sir. The composing room, devil take me if the very former was fired in its frame. We have it out, but not before half a quire of proofs went to tinder." "Not half," Holmes murmured, his nostrils lifting once like a hound's.
"Show me where it began." We were led past the clamour to a chamber where chaos lay in enacted drama, singed galleys stacked like fallen dominoes, puddles glistening on the boards, a bent coin wrench thrown aside in disgust. A compositor with a bandaged palm leaned against the table, while another man, breathing hard, described in jerks how the flames had licked along the paper under the type-bed. Holmes crouched by the press-bed, scanning the charred margin of one form, whose type was still locked. With a penknife, he prized a blackened scrap free and lifted it to the light. The fragment bore a single word, integrity, half-eaten by flame. His gaze shifted to a small canister toppled under the bench. He sniffed the residue and dabbed it against the back of his glove. "Benzoline," he said. "Quick to flash and quick to go. A man who fears smoke prefers speed. Did any stranger come through?" Herndale spluttered. "Only a policeman grew officious, and a gentleman whose card said Sir Lionel Harbury. He arrived scarce 10 minutes before the blaze. When the cry went up, he was in my office. He assisted, credit where it's due, but I'll swear we were tampered with beforehand." Holmes's face did not change, but I saw a fine current move in him. "Sir Lionel is here now?" "In my room," said Herndale. "He is, well, put about." Lestrade shouldered in with an air of proprietorship, his men already fussing about with notebooks. "You see, Mr. Holmes, we have one fire, 2 ladies with veils in the wind, and a dead secretary who handled ink too closely for his health. I begin to smell conspiracy." "You smell burnt benzoline," Holmes returned. "Conspiracies generally prefer subtler perfumes. Nevertheless, come." Sir Lionel rose as we entered, stiff and pale, his eyes, sparking with anger, held under rein. He shook Holmes's hand with a grip that betrayed strain. "Mr. Holmes, I wired Miss Pride to come at once. If a villain's mischief has made tools of us, we shall put our heads together," he said, in a voice meant to carry. Only when Lestrade closed the door did he add, lower, "I am threatened, sir. Anonymous letters, forged instructions, a dead man in my study. If a rival had chosen the method, he could hardly have struck nearer." Holmes drew from his pocket the telegram we had received. "Your wire reached Miss Pride at the typewriting rooms. From where did you send it?" "From the telegraph office in Parliament Street. What has that to do with it?" "Only this," said Holmes. "It is authentically yours. We need not waste breath on that point." He turned suddenly to Herndale. "Would he produce for me, if you please, the waste from your composing room, baskets, sweepings, do not touch them, and bring the composing stone lamp and its wick." While Herndale hurried the order, Holmes crossed to the window and stood with his back to us, his gaze on the dull grey rain. Miss Pride, whom we had kept behind us like a patient under escort, remained by the door, her face composed but bloodless. Lestrade busied himself with names. Sir Lionel gripped the mantle in a white hand. The waste-baskets arrived, 2 wicker bellies of the day's leavings, sloughed proofs, offcuts, twine, a snarled skein of blue binding thread. Holmes sifted without haste, extracting with tweezers a scorched triangle that bore the tail of a capital H and the beginning of a name elided by a smear of violet. He set it aside on clean paper. From the second basket he lifted a match end trimmed with care at both sides as if made to burn brief and bright, and a smear of a substance that caught the light like powdered mica. He touched it with his tongue and made a small face. "Starch! Launderers!" he said. "It carries the heliotrope stronger than the air does." Sir Lionel's head came up sharply. "Do you accuse my niece of arson now?" "Calmly, sir," said Holmes. "I accuse no one of anything I cannot prove, but observe. A gloved hand handled an oiled wick and dusted the match end with starch to catch the fuel quickly. Ladies' pantries know that trick for reluctant lamps, so often do printers' devils and compositors. But the perfume, I have smelled it upon 3 persons today, Miss Harbury, her aunt, and Miss Pride." Miss Pride's chin rose, her eyes steady. "If you knew what passed between Sir Lionel and me by way of work, you would not find that strange." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "I find it convenient. It allows a very tidy mind to lay the same scent upon 3 separate paths, and to walk alone down a 4th. Lestrade gave a snort. "And whose tidy mind is that?" Holmes did not immediately answer. He had taken up the composing stone lamp and was tilting it to draw the wick. The flame flared, then died. He sniffed the char and nodded. "Benzoline again. Herndale, when did you last charge this lamp?" "This morning, Mr. Holmes." "And before the fire, was anyone seen loitering here?" The compositor with the bandaged palm spoke from the doorway. "A lad? No, a gentleman's man. Smart, velvet collar, gloves. Ask my mate the way to your office, sir," he added to Herndale. "He had the manner of a man used to being admitted." Holmes replaced the lamp gently. "Mr. Crail's coat may be passed from back to back," he said. "It appears to be a social garment." He turned to Sir Lionel. "A favour. Write for me, here and now, a line to the effect that you regret the destruction of the proofs, and will call again at 4. Use whatever ink is to hand." Sir Lionel blinked at the oddity, but complied, seating himself at Herndale's desk. Herndale produced a bottle, and Sir Lionel dipped and wrote in a firm, compressed script. Holmes watched not his hand but his face, as if hunting for a flicker. When the Under-Secretary had finished, Holmes lifted the page, breathed on it, and held it to the light. The strokes shone dull and then went flat. "Office black," he said softly. "Nothing homicidal here." He laid the page beside the scorched triangle and fitted their lines one to another, as a boy fits a torn scrap into its first-born sheet. The match was not exact, but the habit of the hand, the way the H kicked at the crossbar, was unmistakable. His eyes kindled, and then at once he masked them. "Lestrade," he said, "you will post 2 men at Sir Lionel's house and 1 at the aunt's in Bayswater. Any visitor smelling of heliotrope will be your bird. Herndale, you will do me the kindness of telegraphing your compositor's supplier for a list of all hands who worked here in the last 6 months and were dismissed. Dismissed men carry grudges like hot bricks. They cannot hold them, and they will not lay them down. Sir Lionel, you will return home by a circuitous route, and you will not, on any account, burn or lock away a single letter. Men who remove evidence at this hour remove their necks into the noose." Sir Lionel stiffened. "You use a tone to which I am unaccustomed, Mr. Holmes." Holmes bowed. "It is the tone one uses when a house sits under a slow match. Forgive its bluntness. There is a person who would have us all run about with pails while he attends to a more delicate flame." He turned to Miss Pride. "Did you ever take dictation from Mr. Quill outside Sir Lionel's house?" She hesitated. "Once, in a coffee-room off Oxford Circus. He feared to be seen. He said a pamphleteer had baited a trap that would close on the wrong man if not sprung at the right moment." "And which was the wrong man?" She met Holmes's eyes. He did not say. Holmes gave a satisfied little nod, as if a figure on his chessboard had at last moved where he expected. Then we must spring our own. At 4 o'clock I require a small room, a chair by a window and a stationary bell push. Herndale, you will write to the anonymous author, through the same dead drop as before, that the proofs survive in duplicate and will be handed in person this afternoon to Sir Lionel at his house. Sir Lionel, you will receive the caller with formality. Miss Pride will sit in the adjoining room with the door ajar, and when our caller raises his right hand to accept the packet, we shall ask him to remove his glove for the sake of candour. He will refuse, and the hand will tell us the rest. Lestrade rubbed his hands. A trap, is it? Now you speak my language. Holmes's smile was quick and wolfish. Not a trap, Inspector, merely a request for civility, but it will do. The man we want cannot bear to touch unprotected what he has laced with poison. Habit is a more faithful mistress than courage. We shall look for a forefinger stained where the ink drives under the nail, a palm scored with the lever crease of a press, and a scent he thought universal enough to become invisible. He looked from face to face and drew on his gloves. Come, Watson, there is one more errand before we lay the cloth. The telegraph boy who carried Sir Lionel's wire will remember the hand that paid him, and the office ledger will remember the hour. Between the two we shall catch our tidy friend cutting his pages to fit. The clerks at the Parliament Street Telegraph Office remembered little beyond the steady rain and the jam of government messengers that hour, but the ledger remembered what human memory sheds. Holmes bent over the ruled columns while the superintendent hovered, solicitous. "Here," he murmured, laying a fingertip on a neat entry, 12 minutes past 1. Message to Miss Pride Bayswater, sender's name Harbury, fee paid in silver. And here, 2 minutes earlier, another Harbury wire to the Civil Service Gazette, care of Mr. Edward Crail, desiring an appointment for 5 o'clock at the Criterion. The superintendent tapped the page. "Both paid by the same gentleman," he said. "I recall because he grumbled at the halfpenny and then laughed and tossed an extra coin. Tallish velvet collar on his greatcoat gloves." "Right-hand gloved?" Holmes asked. "Right gloved, left bare," the man affirmed. "Left had a small smear, ink I'd say. We are used to such here." Outside, Holmes's eyes shone, though his mouth kept its thin line. "You see, Watson, our tidy friend is profligate with wires when the fire runs too slowly. He comforted one tool, summoned another, and arranged a stage of his own. He means for Sir Lionel to meet Crail at 5, by which hour he hopes our proofs will be ash and our tongues contradicting one another. We returned by Baker Street to exchange the rain for dry collars and to collect from Holmes's cabinet certain odds and ends. An envelope long enough to conceal more than paper, a pair of pale kid gloves, a scrap of mirror, and a bottle labelled simply glycerin. He filled a fountain pen with aniline ink from the phial we had decanted at Harley Street and slipped it into his inside pocket. "I have known men betrayed by a cigar ash, a boot crease, a moth's wing," he observed. "This one will be betrayed by his courtesy. Come, punctuality is the politest form of aggression." It wanted 4:45 when we reached Sir Lionel's house. The drawing-room was set as Holmes had ordered, a chair by the window, a table with a single lamp turned low, a bell-push by the jamb where a man might rest his hand without appearing to grope for support. Lestrade had posted a constable at the tradesman's entrance, and another across the street disguised as an idle man with a sore foot. Miss Pride, composed and colourless, sat in the small morning-room with the door ajar, a pen and paper before her to give her the decent appearance of employment. Sir Lionel paced like a man waiting for sentence. Holmes drew him to the light, and, with a touch that in another life might have made an excellent physician, inspected the fingertips of his right hand, the half-moons and the cuticles. "You will forgive the liberty," he he said. "It is as well to know our map before we ask others for theirs." Sir Lionel's fingers were clean, save for the faint trace of blue thread caught upon a cuff button. Holmes flicked it free and dropped it, without looking, into his pocket-book. At 4 o'clock precisely, the front bell announced a visitor in tones that made the footman start. A gentleman was shown in, a spare man of middle height with a neat beard, gloves, and a manner that contrived humility without actually bowing. He presented a card, Mr. Anselm Rowe. The name meant nothing to me. It seemed to mean little to Sir Lionel, who was mastering the art of greeting strangers as if they were creditors. Holmes received him with amiable vagueness. "You come on behalf of the author." Rowe's eyes were quick, appraising. He inclined his head. "The author's interests and the public's, Mr. Holmes. Sir Lionel, the safer course is always to amend a rash phrase before it sees daylight. You will not find me unreasonable." "Nor I you," Holmes replied. "We have arranged matters for everyone's comfort. The proofs survive. You will see them. Sit there. The lamp is better at that angle." He placed Rowe in the window chair so that the weak afternoon light fell sideways across the man's face and hands. Then casually he set the long envelope on the table within arm's reach and stood back with his finger light upon the bell. Rowe's gaze went to the envelope with a hunger he did not trouble to hide. "Then you have duplicates," he said. "Excellent foresight." "I rely on the foresight of others," Holmes returned, and with a little gesture as if in courtesy, drew from his pocket the pale kid gloves and offered them. "We have had regrettable misfortunes with ink today. It would be kind to Mrs. Hudson, our housekeeper, if you would humour me." Rowe hesitated less than a beat, then smiled, and shook his head with urbanity. "I am not fastidious, Mr. Holmes. I have handled dirtier things than journalism." "Then oblige me another way," Holmes said lightly. "Before you touch the sheets, press your finger here." He indicated the bell push, as though asking Rowe to summon more light. The gesture was so ordinary, so domestic, that even my breath caught at its simplicity. Rowe's right hand, still gloved, drifted towards the jamb and poised. He glanced at Sir Lionel, at the envelope, at Holmes. "If it pleases you," he murmured, and rested his forefinger briefly upon the ivory disc. The bell jangled in the hall. Rowe drew back at once, as if he had touched a coal. "Forgive me," he added with an apologetic half-laugh. "I have a trifling abrasion. The air is damp. It stings." Holmes made a sympathetic noise and, with a movement as soft as a sigh, lifted the long envelope with both hands and held it out. "No need to jar your tender skin. Take it by the end. We will not rush you." Rowe took the packet with his left hand. In that instant, so slight it would have escaped any eye but a trained one, Holmes's nostrils flared. He leaned as if to shift the lamp, and his sleeve brushed Rowe's cuff. A very faint odour rose, the same powder-sweet heliotrope, sharpened by something metallic, and underneath it a ghost of benzoline, like a note the ear can't hear until a violin touches it. "Watson," said Holmes, and in his tone there was no haste, only the settled weight of a conclusion. "Note the crease at the base of Mr. Rowe's forefinger. A man who writes much carries his vice in the fingers, as a violinist carries his in the shoulder. But that is not a writer's crease. It is the lever mark of a press." Rowe's face did not change. It is a curious truth that the very boldest men, when found out, are often at their calmest. He inclined his head. "We all have our trades." Lestrade moved like a terrier sighting a rat. "Hold there." Holmes's hand, still gentle, turned Rowe's right wrist, not forcibly, merely with the inevitability of a tide. The glove resisted for a breath and then gave. He peeled it back an inch. Along the nail bed of the forefinger lay the dark oval we had seen on quill, the dye driven under the nail in a stain no scrubbing would lift in an hour. At the base of the finger, a diagonal line, the same angle as the crease we had noted in the poisoned glove. Holmes let the cuff fall as one might let fall a theatre curtain. Mr. Anselm Rowe, compositor dismissed from Herndale's last spring for pilfering type. Lately a reader for the Civil Service Gazette, when the Gazette needs what the law cannot buy. A gentleman's man when gloves are required. A messenger when velvet collars are in season, and I think the anonymous author's knife when paragraphs need sharpening. He pointed, not at Rowe, but at the envelope now in Rowe's left hand. There are no proofs in that packet. There is paper soaked in glycerin and violet ink. Had you taken it with your right hand, the stain would have deepened and the skin absorbed more of what you trusted others to die by. Habit saved you. Rowe's eyes flicked, only once, toward the door of the morning room where Miss Pride sat unseen. It was enough. Lestrade sprang. Sir Lionel, to his credit, moved too. Between them they had the man by the arms. The glove dropped. It fell with a small, soft slap and spun, and the inner seam glinted with that minuscule, dust-like ground glass. He did not struggle, but his lip curled. You have proofs enough, then, of a compositor's hand and a poor man's glove, he said. Print that, Mr. Holmes, but you have not the author nor the name that would singe your gentleman's whiskers. On the contrary, Holmes replied, his voice very quiet. We have a name written in a habit that smears a crossbar. We have a thread of ultramarine that clings to a cuff button. We have a bell that rang at 10 and a niece who left at 11:30. We have, above all, your courtesy, Mr. Rowe. It has told us more than your tongue ever will. He signalled to the hall. The constable came, then another. As they took Rowe, he turned to Sir Lionel. One or two questions more and we shall have done. The paper that came to Mr. Quill by mistake. Which of your enemies would profit from its delay rather than its publication? Who required time, not silence? Sir Lionel stared at the arrested man as if looking past him into a narrower and more perilous chamber. His hand went once to his pocket and then fell. There is only one, he said at last, and if the accusation is false he has the purse to bury it. If true— He broke off, and I saw fear and anger wrestle in his eyes. Mr. Holmes, I will not speak the name until I must. You must, said Holmes gently, and you shall. But here. He glanced at the window where the early dusk thickened to a purple bruise. First, we will walk our prisoner by Fleet Street on the way to the yard, and we will see who looks out from a club window when the rain stops. The man who sent the veiled messenger and dressed this fellow in civility will not sleep until he learns whether his fire has caught. As Rowe was led out, Miss Pride stepped into the doorway. She and the prisoner exchanged one look, hers steady, his unreadable. Then the door closed on him and the house seemed to exhale. Holmes crossed to the mantel and, for the first time that day, permitted himself to sit. "Watson," he said, "your pen. The game turns from ink to fire and back again. We will give it a little air, and then we shall show our author his own handwriting." We took Rowe out between two constables with as little ceremony as the rain would allow. Fleet Street had put on its evening face, the lamps shivering to life along the wet, and in each club window a circle of yellow burned upon the dusk like a monocle. Holmes, who can make a promenade into an experiment, delayed us by trifles. A pause to let a dray pass, a halt to examine a patch of gutter where the benzoline reek from Herndale's had hunted down the drain. so that our small procession came level with the windows of the Albion Press Club at the precise instant when the port wine gentlemen take their seats before the newspapers. "Now," he murmured, as if to the rain. A curtain twitched upon the first floor. A man whose head was all iron-grey precision leaned to look out. And though he drew back with practised swiftness, Holmes had him. There was a small, contemptuous lift to the corner of Holmes's mouth which I have seen only when he scores against an adversary he considers clever enough to be worth the point. "The permanent secretary is in town earlier than he boasted," he said mildly. "Finch?" breathed Lestrade, who had come to Holmes enough to keep pace with his leaps. "Mr. Audley Finch," Holmes returned, keeper of the keys, polisher of reputations, corrector of rash phrases long before they reach a minister's red box. He has the kind of courtesy that remembers bell pushes and the kind of economy that borrows other men's collars. Keep walking. If he comes down, he will not choose to meet his creature at our elbow. But Finch did not come down. He sent the next best thing a cautious man sends, a boy with a note. The lad cut across the street, cast a street sparrow's glance at our little convoy, then veered into the nearest pillar box with a flourish which was too theatrical to be innocent. Holmes took all this in as one takes in the scent of a room, without apparent attention and with complete comprehension. At Bow Street they took row below. He left us with his silence and the faint heliotrope shadowing the air. Lestrade went to the charge-room with a satisfaction that sat upon him like a new hat, and Holmes and I stood a moment by the door before stepping into another cab. "To the Albion," said Holmes. "The front for the eye, the back for the fingers." The porter at the club has the memory that is the true diploma of his calling. Holmes, with his easy, dry good humour, inquired after the weather upon the staircase and the likelihood of lightning by 8. By the time we reached the landing, the man had produced the visitor's book without being asked. Holmes turned it as delicately as a collector turns a vellum, and set the bottle of glycerine upon the table beside it as if easing a cough. "Mr. Finch," he said, half to himself, signs with a flourish he disapproves in others. He showed me the entry for 3:30. The H of Harbury written at one line, the F of Finch half hidden by a blot of violet that had dried with a peacock sheen. "Violet in a club that keeps blue-black in a locked drawer," he went on. "Either the steward experiments or the permanent secretary carries his own bottle for such occasions as require a friendly correction of phrasing." He cast a glance toward the writing-room door. The porter coughed, apologized, and drifted away down the corridor with the tact born of true service. Holmes moved with a cat's economy, door ajar, room swept in a single look. A blotting pad lay by the inkstand, its upper leaf freckled, and the second too clean, as if a page had been lifted and replaced not by the hand that had left it. He damped a corner of paper with glycerine, coaxed the ghosts from the blotter with a rolling motion I had come to recognize, laid them upon a fresh sheet, and set my little pocket mirror to reverse them to sense. Letters swam up pale and then sharpened, alter sold to divulged, mitigate phrase-touching raids, remove permanent secretary, and substitute senior official. AF. Holmes's eyes smiled, his mouth did not. "There is courtesy for you, Watson, the charity that changes verbs. Observe the crossbar of the H, smudged upward by the same slow hand as in our scorched scrap from Herndale's waist. The habit is a man's fingerprint who does not handle his own ink often." "You will accuse him now," I whispered. He replaced blotter and bottle, and we left the room exactly as we had found it. "No, I will set him where his own habit accuses him. If we shout before the last brick is laid, Our tidy friend will blow out our candle and call it the wind. It wanted 20 minutes to 5. The hansom carried us toward the Criterion by a route that Holmes stitched out with invisible thread, down one alley to pick up a boot track he liked, up another to throw a follower. And there was a follower. Twice I glimpsed the velvet-collared greatcoat like a repeating error at the corner of my eye. Holmes took no notice that I could see, which is his way of noticing most. We went in by the side entrance as if chance had conducted us there. Mr. Crail sat already in the coffee-room, large in attitude if not in person, his floridness gone sallow under the gas. His cup stood barely touched, his proof sheets more fingered than read. He lifted his head when Holmes appeared, and then thought better of getting up. "Mr. Crail," said Holmes pleasantly, "you keep appointments with admirable punctuality, even when you have not made them." "I received a wire," he protested. "From Harbury." "From a hand that borrows other men's names." Holmes drew out the club, writing he had lifted to life, and set it flat upon the table between the saucer and the spoon. "You have read too much not to read this. Tell me whose initials those are." Crail looked. His lips made a shape like a child's O when a conjurer produces an egg. "Finch," he said, and then, lower, like a beef muttering, "Well, well." "Precisely. And you were to be the loud end of a quiet thing. Your courage is not in question, Mr. Crail. Your discretion is. Who handed you Sir Lionel's counterfeit last night?" He wet his lips. The pressure of a public house will squeeze the truth from an editor better than the Yard. A man hates to look foolish under mirrors. "A messenger from the Home Office," he muttered. "Name never said. I met him at the corner by the Abbey. He wore—" "A velvet-collared greatcoat," Holmes finished, "and heliotrope to persuade any witness that it was a lady. Did he keep his right glove on?" Crail nodded reluctantly. "Thank you. You will oblige me by going at once to Bow Street and repeating that, and you will further oblige me by printing nothing until tomorrow noon. If you must print this, that a compositor named Rowe is suspected of theft of proofs and has been taken. That will serve to bring out our author better than a leader would." Crail bristled faintly. "You take much upon yourself, Mr. Holmes." "I economize your courage," said Holmes. "You will need it tomorrow." We left him between pride and prudence and stepped again into the evening. The follower had drawn closer. I felt rather than saw Holmes change his pace by half a degree. In Piccadilly he allowed the tide to carry us to a standstill beside a coster's barrow. Without turning his head, he said, "When I move my left hand, step off the curb." He moved it as if to adjust his cuff. We went down, the follower came up, and Lestrade, who had not been with us and yet was there, rose like a jack-in-the-box from the other side of the barrow and had the man by the wrist. It was not Finch, of course. It was the kind of man Finch would send, clean-shaven, respectably hungry, with a scar that said he had once cut someone else's meat. In his pocket was a note that smelt faintly of heliotrope and benzoline, and in the note was written, "If Rowe is taken, destroy Herndale's second set. If Harbury yields, print at once. If neither, wait." "Wait for what?" Lestrade demanded. "For 8, said Holmes. "The hour at which Parliament dines and a permanent secretary walks home with nobody to notice whether the gas-burners jump when he opens his door." We sent the fellow where Rowe had gone, and Holmes hailed our cabman for Harley Street with a briskness I had learned meant the end of one chapter and the hinge of the next. In Sir Lionel's drawing-room the heir still remembered Rowe's presence. Miss Pride's pen had not moved from where she had steadied it with a nail-mark. The bell-push lay dead and innocent. Sir Lionel stood by the grate, very still, with a letter in his hand that he did not read. Mr. Holmes, he said without preface, if you can spare Miss Pride a scandal, do it. She is a better servant to the state than some who take the oath for it. Holmes accepted the compliment for Miss Pride with a bow of the head. We shall spare whom we can. Mr. Finch has sent to have you ruined by fire and mended by print, and when both failed he meant to wait out the thunder and move when the streets were empty. We will relieve him of the necessity of choosing. He set his watch upon the mantel, wound it a turn, and glanced to the window. The rain had spent itself to a tick. The fog was back, laying its cold hand upon the panes. At 7:45, he said, you will receive Mr. Finch by your own invitation. You will be as courteous as his marginal verbs. You will say you are grateful for his care in altering sold to divulged and permanent secretary to senior official. You will place before him a sheet which bears no proofs and no poison, and you will ask him very simply whether he approves the substitution of one man's ruin for another's. When he reaches for the paper, you will watch his right hand. Sir Lionel swallowed. If he goes out again? He will not, said Holmes with that calm that has steadied me in more crises than I can count. But if he does, there are 3 men between here and the corner who will admire his back before they lay their hands on it. Watson, we will take the little case with the mirror and the glycerine. Lestrade, 2 men at the area, steps and 1 at the mews gate. Miss Pride, courage. You have done nothing but what courage and ignorance do every day in London service. The shame is not yours. She looked at him then, as if he had unwound a cord she had not known was round her throat. Will you, she began, and then stopped, fighting tears like a soldier fights a cough. Thank you. Holmes took up his hat. His face in the lamplight showed that curious mingling of ferocity and pity that makes strangers call him cold. We will go out, he said, and come back by another door. The tidy man we hunt keeps a clean threshold. Let us see if he has learned to sweep behind the bell. At 7:08, the fog thickened until the street lamps were no more than coins pressed against wet cloth. Within, Sir Lionel's drawing-room was prepared to a nicety. The chair by the window angled to throw a cross-light over the visitor's hands. The lamp lowered. The bell-push handy as a civility. A single sheet upon the table, carrying in Holmes's rapid but clerkly copy the paragraph that had set all London to whispering. Miss Pride waited in the little morning-room with the door drawn to, her breathing scarce ruffling the silence. Lestrade's men lay like stitches along the seams of the house. Holmes glanced at the mantel. His watch ticked with its sober assurance. Remember, he said to Sir Lionel, you are tired of being rescued. You desire only that rash phrases be softened by a practised hand. Sir Lionel managed a ghost of a smile that did him credit. I have practised that part all my life. The bell rang, not with the nervous peal of a petitioner, but with 2 precise strokes. The footman ushered in Mr. Audley Finch. He was a tall, spare man, all clean angles and brushed iron grey, a face made for rules, not for conversation. He smelt faintly of the pavement and of that subtle powder sweet which seemed by now less a perfume than a signature. His gloves were in his left hand, his right, bare and dry, hung at his side with the correctness of a sword at rest. His eyes took in the room with the sweep of an accustomed inspector and came to rest upon the paper on the table as a hawk's upon movement. Sir Lionel, he said, with the measured cordiality of an office that need not prove itself, your wire found me between duties. I was glad of it. The times are not hospitable to imprecision. Holmes stepped back into the shadow as if surrendering the stage. Sir Lionel bowed. You have been good enough to advise me before, Mr. Finch. I should be grateful for your judgment upon this passage. The sale of information within departments. Is sale too crude a verb? Finch's mouth compressed in something that might have been approval. It would be prudent to mitigate. Divulged will serve. The sense remains, the libel runs less freely. He moved a half-step nearer, and I saw the quick remembrance in him of where he stood, a private room, a closed door, a paper between two men. Then, with the neat logic of a practised hand, he made it respectable. "Permit me?" Holmes, from the shadow, made the smallest inclination. Sir Lionel drew forward his chair a trifle, so that the visiting secretary must sit in the window seat, where the light was a judge and not a partner. Finch sat, laid his gloves upon the table, and from his inner pocket produced a small travelling ink, its glass catching the lamp like a quiet eye. He uncapped it with care and set it well away from the sheet, as a tidy man does with anything that might blot. The peacock sheen of violet flickered a moment at the lip and was gone. Holmes said quite pleasantly, "The bell is stiff. If you would press it, we will disturb Mrs. Hudson for a blotter." Finch's right hand paused and then obeyed. He depressed the ivory disc without haste, without flinching. The bell jangled in the hall. His forefinger left the button as if it had never been there. Holmes's eyes half closed, not in disappointment, but in adjustment, as a marksman narrows to another sight. "Your kindness," he murmured. The footman appeared with the blotter and withdrew. Finch took up Sir Lionel's pen, the one Holmes had charged with common office black, and wrote with a firm, unlovely hand a single line through "sold," the neat insertion divulged, and in the margin a compact AF, set like a stamp that refused ornament. He did not use the house ink, he did not need it. The gesture was enough, authority by economy. "Permanent secretary?" Sir Lionel asked, his voice steady in its chosen humility. "Is that too naked a rank to name, even as a class?" Finch's eyes lifted to his. "It is both too naked and too laughable. Let it read a senior official. The public is content with rank. It need not peep through keyholes as well." He extended his hand for the paper with a courtesy that had ends to it like a rule. Sir Lionel passed it. Holmes leaned once, as if to adjust the shade, and I saw the flash of a small mirror in his palm, no larger than a playing card, catch for an instant the margin where the initials lay. He let the mirror fall back into the case as softly as a sigh. "You will forgive me," Holmes said, stepping forward at last with the air of a man content to play footman to other men's cause, "if I test a household superstition. There is a notion among copyists that some inks announce themselves at the mirror more honestly than to the naked eye." He took up the blotter and turned a fresh leaf upon it with a practised economy. "Indulge me one turn of the wrist, Mr. Finch." Finch's polite surprise did not lose its edge. "If it serves Sir Lionel's peace." Holmes pressed the amended lines lightly upon the blotter and rolled, with that gentle, glycerin-damped motion I had seen twice that day, a ghost of the strokes upon a clean paper. He set his little mirror to reverse the backward letters. The pale mirror writing stood out in its finicking exactitude, and there, as if our earlier spectre had touched this one with a finger and smiled at the recognition, lay the same habit, the upward smudged crossbar upon the H of Harbury in a preceding line, the tight, precise initials AF at the margin. Holmes lowered the mirror and did nothing theatrical. He merely set the blotter down and looked at Finch with the kind of almost friendly interest he might have given a rare insect that had obligingly alighted upon his sleeve. "You keep a private bottle of violet in a club that prefers blue-black,"
he observed. You soften verbs with a conscience that loves grammar better than truth. You correct the world by inches so that no one sees the feet move. You also employed a compositor's hand to carry your more hurried paragraphs and a journalist's vanity to shout when whispers failed. It is a tidy empire, Mr. Finch. The secretary's gaze did not flicker, only a point of colour came and went at his cheekbone. I keep a bottle, he said, because I cannot trust servants. I advise because England cannot afford fools. If you wish to embroider that into a charge, Mr. Holmes, you will need a thicker thread. Holmes's tone stayed mild. This will do. He drew from his pocket the pale spectre taken at the Albion's blotter and placed it beside the present ghost. The marginal hand answered itself across time and street, the same measured initials, the same pinched habit in the downstroke of the F, like a lip pressed thin. Sir Lionel stood very still. You sent the messenger to Crail, he said, not as a question, but as a verdict a judge reads himself. You altered the instructions at Herndale's. You! What in God's name had Quill to do with it? Finch's eyes moved to the sheet, not to Sir Lionel. Quill was a clerk. He had a clerk's disease. Conscience. He wanted the right scandal, not the useful one. It was necessary to delay him until a more adult arrangement could be made. Holmes's voice did not rise. So you sent Roe to bring mercurial ink into a household where a woman would borrow a bottle of heliotrope for her veil and leave it in the air like a calling card. And when fire did not eat your proofs quickly enough, you let benzoline supply speed. And when neither smoke nor poison sufficed, you proposed to mend the English language in
Sir Lionel's study while Parliament dined. You have courage of a sort, Mr. Finch. It is the courage of a man who believes that grammar is morality. Lestrade pushed the door inward with the discretion of a man arriving late to a conversation he none the less understands. That will do, he said, not roughly. Mr. Audley Finch, I'll have you accompany me. You may do it on your feet or on mine. I am indifferent to style. Finch rose. There was nothing in his manner of a trapped creature. He looked rather like a man called from one dull committee to another. He glanced once at Sir Lionel, no plea, no malice, and then at Holmes, whose face was now at its most unreadable. I have served 3 Home Secretaries, Finch said. I have done what the country required. If you choose to give the mob a better story, it will thank you for a day and be bored the next. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Do not flatter yourself that the mob is my audience. I care nothing for its appetite. I care that a man died to keep a verb honest, and that you chose the wrong verb in the matter of responsibility. His hand flicked to the bell. For civility's sake, Mr. Finch, ring our host out. It was a cruel courtesy, and a precise one. Finch's right hand moved. He pressed the ivory without pause. No stain lay under his nail. No lever crease marked his finger. He was not the hand that pushed the poison glove against wet paper, or the hand that turned the press. He was the mind that instructed such hands. Holmes nodded, as if some inward tally had come even. Take him, Lestrade. As they moved to the door, Miss Pride stepped from the morning room, pale but steady. Finch's gaze touched her and passed, no more than a census-taker's acknowledgment of a unit. It was, in its way, the most damning look I had seen that night. When the men and their charge had gone, the room seemed larger and colder. Sir Lionel sank into the chair Finch had used and stared at the amended word as if it were a scar. "Will this end it?" he asked hoarsely. Holmes replaced his mirror in its case and capped the little bottle with a surgeon's neatness. "No," he said, not unkindly. "It was never only a pamphlet. Tomorrow men will pretend it was. They will argue about libel and leaks and the decent obscurity of ranks, but We have a compositor who will talk if promised daylight, a journalist who will print what is safe and hint what is not, and a permanent secretary who has written his name where we can read it without a key. He looked toward the window where the fog pressed like a second curtain. There remains the author, the one who hid behind Rowe's sleeve and Finch's adjectives. He will either run or come nearer. If he runs, we shall know where. If he comes, he will bring with him the only motive in this case worth the word. Sir Lionel raised his head. Which is? Not ruin, Holmes said softly. Policy. He tapped the paragraph with a fingertip that left no mark. A change of a single word may shift a nation an inch. Someone meant to move it a foot. He turned to me with that quick flair I have learned to love. Come, Watson, we have an appointment with a compositor who likes clean floors. If we are to catch the author, we must learn which passages he feared, not for libel, but for accuracy. The truth, when it burns, leaves a smell no perfume will cover. Rowe did not at first prove more tractable than a well-placed nail. He sat with his hands loose upon his knees in the Bow Street charge room and watched us with the sullenness of a man who has learned that silence costs less than eloquence. Holmes had no mind to haggle. He placed upon the table, one by one, 3 trifles arranged as neatly as counters, Crayle's note smelling faintly of heliotrope and benzoline, the scorched triangle from Herndale's waist bearing the ghost of a name, and the glove whose inner seam still freckled our air with violet. He did not speak to Rowe, but to the things. Here, he said, as if lecturing a class of obedient objects, is vanity hired by a quiet hand. Here, tidiness where fire has misbehaved. Here, courtesy laced with mercury. Between them is a mind that prefers to alter verbs rather than facts. Names, Mr. Rowe, are currency. Motives are the mint. Help us to the mint, and I will see you do not pay more than your trade's tariff. Rowe's jaw worked. Then the obstinacy in him bent by a degree. I had my orders, he said hoarsely. You may print that. You may print that I never laid a finger on Quill after he was cold. We will print, Holmes returned evenly. What is true? Where did you take your orders? The drop, Rowe muttered. Back room at the Pilgrim Coffee House off the Strand. There's a reading case for foreign journals. Bottom drawer sticks. You must lift the left corner and give it a tap. Thursday nights and Sunday mornings. Payment? A sovereign under the paper or a note telling where to find one. He looked up for the first time, and his eyes had in them a reluctant admiration, like a dog's for a man it would rather bite. He has a scholar's hands, clean, but ink gets under the left nail. He scratches at it when he thinks. He wears cheap gloves in the street and throws them away when the fingertips go. He coughs, soft like a muffled bellows. There's a seal on his envelope, a beast like a dragon with wings. A weaven, said Holmes quietly. 2 feet, barbed tail. Very good. Did you ever hear him speak? Rowe shook his head. Only saw his back once in a glass when he was going out. Be thin, the kind that eats soup with a book propped open. Holmes's mouth made the half smile I have learned means a line has tightened on his inner map. You have done as well as a compositor can, who has been taught the wrong alphabet. If you will add 2 particulars, the
paper and the pencil, you shall have from me, when this is over, a letter which will keep you from transportation. Rowe's shoulders sagged a fraction. Paper's thick, laid. Braithwaite extra wove, I've had it under my hand. The pencil's one of them copying sorts, so when you lick it, it goes a shade of violet. I've seen him moisten the point, just the once, through the crack of the screen. Excellent, said Holmes, rising. You have made yourself cheaper and therefore safer. See, Lestrade, a gentleman with a cough, a left thumb that drinks ink, a wyvern seal, and a taste for copying pencils. We shall be at the Pilgrim in 20 minutes. If our author has learned punctuality from Mr. Finch, his hand may yet be under the lid. The Pilgrim had always been to me an unremarkable place, one of 1,000 London rooms in which men pretend to read and actually listen. That night it was a muffled ship at anchor, gas turned low, the fog pressing its nose against the panes, the murmuration of 2 or 3 habitués who had the sense of shadows. Holmes drifted past the counter as if he were looking for a misplaced umbrella, nodded at the potman, and found the reading case at the back, where journals lay in a decent confusion. The drawer stuck obediently. Holmes lifted, tapped, and slid it back with that tenderness he gives to obstinate wood. At the rear, where the dust lay thin as flour, was a folded sheet wrapped in the Allgemeine Zeitung. He did not open it at once, but held it to the lamplight so that I saw, embossed upon the flap, the faint impression of a ring. A wyvern, rampant, tiny as a coin's ghost. "Do you smell it?" he asked. "Paper," I said, "and the old glue of drawers." "And carbolic?" he returned softly. "Not heliotrope. Our tidy man sends others to wear flowers. He keeps his hands clean with a surgeon's virtue." He broke the wafer and shook out the contents. There were 3 items. The first was a brief instruction. If Roe is taken, Herndale's second set must be found and destroyed. If Harbury yields, go to press at once. If neither, wait. The second was a list of corrections to the pamphlet in the same small, finicking hand. Divulged for sold, senior official for permanent secretary, informal understandings for payments. The third was a calling card with the corner clipped. Blank, save for the pressed address of a lodging house in Northumberland Chambers, and in the lower right a cipher of 3 dots set triangularly. Holmes's eyes glinted. A man who corrects by habit will mark his identity with as little ink as possible. 3 dots, 3 points in a policy memorandum often mean a section. Our man thinks in sections. He turned the card over. On the back, in pencil, someone had written, and then half erased, a line. "Anonymous loquitur, pro salute, re publicae." The copying lead had left its violet ghost where the eraser faltered. "Latin," I said. "School Latin," Holmes corrected. "A classical flourish for a modern sin. The anonymous speaks for the safety of the state." He glanced at the clipped corner. "Left lower, the signal of a man who promises to call. He will not. Others call for him." Footsteps creaked upon the stair behind the coffee room. A door somewhere snicked. Holmes's head turned the width of 2 degrees. "We are not alone," he breathed. "Take the street, Watson. If anything runs that coughs softly, let it run towards the Strand, not away." We separated, as we have done often, without drama. I had the pavement a moment later, the fog cold upon my face like a damp hand. The Strand whispered and hissed. A hansom rattled, checked, and went on. The coffee-house door did not open. Then quietly, as if persuaded by the fog, it did. A man came out with his hat brim pulled down and his collar up. He had that air of tidy urgency which the guilty assume when they wish to look like officials. He coughed once into a handkerchief and turned west. I moved with him, angling to push him into the light spill of a chemist's window. He sensed me by that sideways instinct animals have in the dark, and quickened. He did not run. His courtesy would not permit it. "Sir," I said cheerfully, as one might hail an acquaintance, and his head came round, thin, long, the profile cut like steel, then away. The cuff of his left glove brushed my sleeve and left a clean, medicinal breath. The right hand was ungloved, the thumb stained in the crescent,
with a faint purple that soap had not conquered. He lifted that hand as if to dismiss me, and in so doing showed a ring that caught the chemist's glare, a wyvern, its tail barbed. Our eyes met for the fraction of a beat in which masks neither slip nor fit, but simply drop into usefulness. He did not speak. He turned into the next alley, and I after him, only to find Holmes already there, a shadow stepping from shadow. The man halted between us, his back to the alley's blind wall, and smiled with the faintest effort at civility. "Gentlemen," he said, and the soft cough came again. "The fog is a poor court for introductions." "Mr. Vale," said Holmes, and the name fell with that slight inevitability I have heard when he announces a mate taken on the chessboard. "You will permit us the advantage of the inner room at Bow Street. It is warmer there, and the punctuation is more exact." The man inclined his head. "If I decline?" "You will cough 3 streets and be taken at the 4th, Holmes replied. "You are a public servant. The public will forgive you a cold. It will not forgive you flight." He went with us as if he had merely remembered an appointment. In the cab he sat very straight and looked out upon nothing. Once he said without turning, "If you print the wrong name, you will set back a reform by 10 years. Holmes answered him with grave courtesy. "If you murder the wrong man for the right reform, you set back something irreparable." At Bow Street he gave his name to the desk sergeant as Oswald Vale, and when Lestrade heard it, he whistled low. "Treasury," he murmured to me aside. "Brains behind half the new schemes, police estimates, prisons, the lot." In the inspector's room, with the door shut upon the outer hum, Holmes laid the pilgrim packet upon the table, and set beside it the blotter ghosts from the Albion and Sir Lionel's study. Vale's eyes touched them and moved on, not to the glove or the scorched scrap, but to the list of altered phrases. His mouth pinched, and then steadied. "I will tell you what I can without betraying more than one oath," he said quietly. "There is a ring of men who buy ahead of the law. Your syndicate. We have been nearer it this month than in 2 years. The pamphlet, my pamphlet, would have broken their protection if it had been printed as written. It named no rank that did not deserve it. But Mr. Finch observed, rightly, that if we struck at a permanent secretary, the ministry would fall and the syndicate with it slip 3 doors down and buy another key. He proposed divulged for sold to avoid a suit. I let him. He proposed delay. I let him. I did not propose Quill's death. Holmes's gaze did not soften. But you proposed his peril. You hired Rowe's hand. You placed fire where paper lay and pretended the benzoline was accident. You wrapped your orders in Latin and carbolic and told yourself the state required neatness. Vale's lips thinned. The state often requires what a clergyman would call sin. And sometimes, Holmes returned very low, what a man calls murder. You will answer for where you drew that line. I will, Vale said simply. He glanced then at me, as if remembering that the world contains men who write as well as judge. Doctor, you will set me down as a villain. Perhaps I am. If the syndicate breaks because of what I have done, the city sleeps better. If it does not, he lifted his stained thumb as if in a small, ironic salute. Then I have been merely a tidy man untidily caught. Who sold the raids? Holmes asked. Vale's eyes flicked once, tired, angry, honest enough to hate the economy of the next admission. Not Finch, not Harbury. A man you will not touch without burning your fingers. I will write their name. You will verify it without me or not at all. He reached for the pen. Holmes let him. The nib scratched. The violet in the copying pencil lifted as he moistened it and darkened the downstroke. He wrote a single name upon clean paper and pushed it, like a small, dangerous gift, across the table. Holmes's eyes went down. In their depths, something rare in him moved. Pity, perhaps, or weariness. "You see," Vale said, with a cough that did not trouble to hide itself now. "Policy, a foot, not an inch." Holmes folded the paper and placed it in his case without showing it to me. "Lestrade," he said, with that swift return to the practical that is part of his genius, "you will keep Mr. Vale where a cough can be heard and a pen denied. We have a house to visit before the fog thins, and a bell to ring where the sound will be unwelcome." We stepped into the corridor together. I touched his sleeve. "You will not tell me the name?" "Soon enough," he said. "For the moment, let us take the right verb. To arrest, Watson. The noun will supply itself." Holmes did not speak until we were once more in a cab, with the fog pressing like wet felt upon the glass. He sat with the folded paper Vale had written upon tucked flat against his knee, his eyes on nothing, his mind, I knew, upon everything. "Northumberland Chambers," he said at last, to the jarvey through the trap. And then, to me, as one gives a man a step, but not yet, the landing. "It is as well you have not known the name until now, Watson. Your face tells more truth than your pen." He let the silence fill again. I watched the ghost of a lamplighter pass, the blur of a woman's shawl at a crossing, the steely gleam upon the wet muzzle of a policeman's horse. When at last he looked at me, it was with that grave humour by which he hides pity. "You remember," he said, "the calling card from the Pilgrim, its corner clipped as the sign of a promised call. The address pressed faint in the lower right, Northumberland Chambers, and our 3 dots, a scholar's economy, a civil servant's superstition. Vale writes like a man who thinks in sections. The author keeps rooms like a man who loves anonymity better than comfort. We go now to ring a bell he instructs others to ring for him. You will tell me whom we go to meet?" "Presently." He tapped the case where the name lay imprisoned. "It is a man who sells time, not for money, money is the greasy instrument, but for policy. He pays his own conscience in verbs and expects the nation to thank him for the change. He has the ear of men who think themselves the head. He owns nothing, which is why he can be bought." The cab drew up where the Strand grows sober and respectable, and houses like good wives show their best faces to the street. Northumberland Chambers was a block of rooms that would have suited a bachelor of taste and limited means, a clean portico, a glazed door, with the name in small gold capitals, a porter's desk within as modest as a curate's. Holmes stepped in as if to inquire after a friend. The porter, whom fog had rendered philosophical, lifted a book with 2 fingers. "It is late," he observed. "Gentlemen do not expect callers at this hour." "Mr. P, as friends do," Holmes said pleasantly. He turned the visitor's book toward himself and ran a finger down the afternoon's entries. It stopped once, lightly. "We shall announce ourselves. Your names?" "Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. If Mr. P is at home, the sooner he knows it, the better." The man's eyelids flickered. This was not the music he liked, but he had learned to dance to it. He rang, and the sound went thin along a corridor like a thread pulled through linen. We were shown up one flight, then another, to a landing where the fog pressed black against a window, and a single gas, turned low, made a dim halo about a polished frame. At the end of the passage, a door stood, with the shy, expensive shyness of a private door. As we advanced, it opened a hand's breadth, and then, as if acknowledging the inevitable, swung wider. He stood there with a quiet that was almost wit. His face was the sort the city impresses upon certain men, smooth where it must be smooth, lined where it may be lined without loss of credit, The eyes were clever and tired. He coughed once into his hand, not to display weakness, but because the body insists. His right thumb bore at the cuticle that faint violet half-moon I had begun to read as one reads a cipher. His left hand held a cheap glove, the fingertips worn. "Mr. Holmes," he said. "Doctor, the rooms are at your service." I had not expected the compliment. "Mr. Peregrine Bracknell," said Holmes, and the name sounded with that sober music by which a man reads sentence upon the man who has already judged himself. "You have left larger rooms noisier than these by pretending to balance 2 account books at once. The one, policy, you keep too neat, the other, honour, you have allowed to be altered by hands less clean than your own." He stood aside with the courtesy of a man accustomed to letting people enter before he pushes the door shut. We passed into a sitting-room that was the apotheosis of order. Books in ranks, a desk cleared as if for inspection, a small copying press in the corner like a discreet servant, a bottle of carbolic on the washstand. The air held none of the city's cheap scent. It was antiseptic, purposeful, cold. "I have, you see," he said with the ghost of amusement, "the habits of a clerk and the income of a gentleman. They do not reconcile easily. You have read Vale's name, of course. You have made him your confession. He is an honest man, for all that he traffics in prose." Holmes did not sit. "He is an honest man who thought to save the public by risking one life. You are a man who thought to save a policy by selling many. The raids you sold bought you time. The time bought you these rooms. Shall we count the steps in the staircase between them?" "Mr. Holmes," Bracknell said mildly, "you cannot convict a man for syllogisms. You require papers." "Then we will fetch them," Holmes returned, and in a heartbeat the room was full of other feet. Lestrade, whose men had been a step behind us on the stair, came in with the apology of an uninvited guest who yet has a warrant in his pocket. He was at the desk in 2 strides, the drawers open under his hand, and my friend beside him, his look like the blade of a knife held flat against the light. Bracknell made no move. He watched as one watches someone else pack one's portmanteau badly. The desk held little, a ledger with balances too innocent to be true, a sheaf of memoranda in Finch's tidy marginal hand, correcting verbs away from crimes, a dossier of addresses, Herndale's, the Gazette, the Pilgrim, penned in a secretary's round that was not his. An honest man's room, if one believed in the honesty of furniture. Holmes crossed instead to the press. He touched it once, gently, let his finger find the lever, and smiled without mirth. "It has a bell," he remarked, and pressed. The tiny jingle, delicate as a teacup's laugh, stung the room. He drew the screw down and looked at the felt bed. "New. Yesterday or today, and yet—" He lifted the felt with a blade and showed, beneath, the thinnest drift of glittering dust. A compositor's dandruff. "You are neat, Mr. Bracknell, but your pocket hates to be emptied." He turned then to the window. The sash, like Sir Lionel's, was unlatched not for air but for reach. On the outside ledge, where one would never see it from the street, lay a clay flower pot with no flower, only earth. Holmes dipped a finger, lifted it to his nose, and made a small sound of content. "Benzoline," he said. "You decant it, dry the pot, and if you have to teach a junior where to slip a match end, you hide your lesson where a housemaid will not water it." Bracknell's mouth twisted. The nearest his composure had come to disarrangement. "Do you propose to hang me for gardening, Mr. Holmes? It would be a notable reform." "I propose to arrest you for selling the map to our constable's feet," Holmes said, "and for conspiring with a man with a velvet collar and another with a tidy pen to delay a pamphlet that would have upset your market. I propose, further, to take the liberty of this room's door. For as he spoke, he had crossed, not to the door by which we had entered, but to a narrow one between bookcases. He pushed it, and it gave on a passage. The air came thin and stale, with the reek of dust and something metallic beneath. A step within, and we were in a closet with a second press, a smaller, mean-looking thing whose felt was dark with honest work. On a shelf above lay a row of cheap gloves, each with its right fingertip ink-stained to the seam. Lestrade drew in his breath like a man who has found the key under the mat. "There's your civility, Mr. Holmes," he said softly. Holmes took down one glove between finger and thumb. "Ladies' size," he said. "Long wrist, loose stitch. The batch from Lewin's that Miss Pride bought last week, with the housekeeping money she earned, copying for men who would not let her sign. You brought a pair when you called at Harley Street, Mr. Bracknell, and when they did not fit the part, you left one to make the room neater than the truth." Bracknell did not answer. He had gone to the window and stood there with his back to us, looking not into the fog, there was nothing to see, but at the shape the fog made upon the glass. When he spoke, it was in that level tone of a man who has kept order in his voice long enough to have forgotten how to change it. "You do not understand what you prevent." Holmes's reply, when it came, had no triumph in it. "Perhaps not. I have lived too long by inches to believe in feet. But I understand that a man lies dead who would be alive if you had not believed yourself tidy." He nodded to Lestrade. "You will take him, Inspector." Lestrade stepped forward with his formal words. Bracknell turned, and for the first time something like heat came into his eyes. "You will print the name," he said to Holmes, as if he doubted and dared him at once. "You will string it to mine." "I will print," Holmes said, "what will hold. We have enough for the yard's rope. We will have more for the public's appetite to tie a bow it cannot untie. Crail will be useful in the morning, Roe too, and Finch's initials will keep. Vale will not run. Between them you will find that verbs can hang a man when nouns are shy." Bracknell coughed, covered it, and straightened. He picked up his worn glove with the fastidious pinch of a man who cannot help being orderly. "Very well," he said. "I have kept worse appointments." We went down with him between us. The porter stared and looked away. In the street the fog received us with its soft complicity, and the lamps, those coins on wet cloth, lay where we had left them. Holmes touched my sleeve. "You see now," he said, as if the last string had drawn tight upon the net within his mind, why the author feared accuracy and why the murderer loved neatness. They were the same man's habits divided between two consciences. Come, my dear fellow, there will be talk enough to occupy 10 mornings. Tonight we will give Mrs. Hudson the kindness of being home before the soup is cold." Dawn found Baker Street washed pale by rain, the fog thinning into a weary mist that clung only to the eaves and lamp-posts. Holmes stood by the window with his dressing-gown drawn close, a cigarette between his fingers, and that lean intensity upon his face which no victory could wholly soften. The morning papers lay open upon the table, their columns bristling with the first whiff of scandal. Sir Lionel Harbury's name was printed with the respectful distance due to an official assisting the authorities. Finch's arrest occupied a more prominent paragraph, his courtesy to the police having won him no indulgence. Of Bracknell there was yet nothing, only a cautious note that certain inquiries were proceeding. The machinery of reputation, that most delicate of instruments, had begun to hum. Watson sat opposite, his pen idle above his notebook. "You have kept the name from me still, Holmes," he said at last. "Vale wrote it, you folded it, and the case is closed, but not for me. I cannot pretend ignorance any longer." Holmes smiled faintly, a man indulgent toward a friend's moral appetite. My dear Watson, the case was never about names. It was about a method. A single poisoned glove would have been crude enough, but what we have seen here is the perfection of bureaucratic murder, done with a pen, signed in the passive voice, and buried beneath the minutes of a meeting. He flicked the ash from his cigarette. The name upon Vale's note was Bracknell's, of course. You knew it before I opened the paper, but behind him, behind them all, there is no single villain to hang, only a system of tidy men, too careful to soil their hands while they sell other men's lives. Watson frowned. Yet the law, Holmes interrupted gently, has arrested Bracknell, who will hang if his nerve deserts him. Finch, who will talk because he prefers scandal to silence, and Rowe, who will live because his trade was ignorance. That is justice's arithmetic, but moral mathematics is another discipline entirely. He turned from the window and regarded the papers as though they were medical charts. Vale will face his superiors, who will thank him privately and disgrace him publicly. Sir Lionel will be retired with commendation. The pamphlet will never be printed, save in footnotes, and London will go on selling its secrets 1 penny cheaper than yesterday. He crossed to the mantel and stood there, the cigarette burning low between his fingers. You see, Watson, every man in this case believed himself serving the state. Finch and Bracknell wished to protect policy. Vale wished to reform it. Quill wished to purify it. Only Quill died. And of the three, he alone had no self-interest in his zeal. It is a melancholy truth that honesty is more combustible than deceit. I was silent for a while, hearing the distant clip of hooves upon the damp street, the muffled call of a newsboy hawking the day's edition. At length I said, "And what of Miss Pride? She was but a pawn, used and discarded by these men." Holmes's expression softened. The keen light in his eyes dimmed to something almost human. "She has left London," he said. "Sir Lionel has arranged a position for her at a small college in Winchester, copying still, but for a dean who pays his debts in gratitude, not in ink. She will recover her courage in work, which is more than most of us can boast. I have sent her a note, merely to say that she has more honour than the men who employed her. She may never believe it, but it will do her no harm to read it." He moved to the violin case, opened it, and drew out the instrument with that ritual grace which always preceded a rare relaxation. The first low note quivered through the room like a sigh exhaled by the fog itself. "Do you recall, Watson," he said after a moment, "the first glove we found? Ink within, not without. Poison turned inward as if the very hand that worked wished to destroy itself. There lies the essence of all such crimes. The corruption never begins in the action, but in the intent. They poison their own conscience first, and the rest follows." He played softly, the melody austere and slow, as though he sought to order his own thoughts into harmony. When the last note faded, he turned to me with a wry twist of the lips. "You may title your account The Case of the Ink-Stained Glove, if you must. It will sound suitably romantic to your readers. Leave out the names that deserve no immortality. They will appear in Whitehall's memoranda soon enough." "I shall tell it as it was," I said. "But I wish, Holmes, that for once the conclusion were clean, that guilt could be tidied like a blotter sheet." He gave a short, almost amused breath. "My dear fellow, life is not a blotter. It is the ink itself, spilled, absorbed, and impossible to lift without tearing the page. We merely prevent it from reaching the margins." A knock came then, firm, familiar, and cheerfully out of key with our mood. Lestrade entered, hat in hand, his face a study in weary satisfaction. "It's finished, Mr. Holmes. Bracknell's signed a confession of sorts, full of half-truths, mind you, but enough to close it. He says the glove was meant only to frighten Quill. Clever devil, thought mercury would give him a fever, not kill him." "You were right, as ever. The Home Office thanks you, unofficially, of course." Holmes inclined his head. "The Home Office is always unofficial when the truth proves inconvenient. Convey my compliments to your superiors and my condolences to the public." Lestrade blinked, half suspecting irony, then bowed himself out. When the door had closed, Holmes set the violin aside and drew his dressing-gown more tightly, as though the warmth of the case had cooled him. "There is your ending, Watson," he said. "A confession, a rope, a paragraph in the Times, and beneath it all, the same machinery ticking on, wound by men who think themselves indispensable. It will take another generation to unwind it, if ever." He glanced once more toward the window, where the mist was thinning into daylight. "Still," he added quietly, "it is no small thing to have held back one poisoned hand, even for a night. That must suffice." He reached for his pipe, the habitual gesture sealing the matter in his mind. I watched the first curls of smoke rise and mingle with the morning light, and thought, as I have often thought, that no man ever fought so fiercely against evil without courting some of its loneliness. The city outside was waking, innocent of its own deliverance. And in that calm between endings, as the fog lifted from Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat silent in his chair, his eyes half closed, as if listening to the faint echo of a bell that had rung far off, and been answered. The morning after Bracknell's arrest dawned sharp and colourless over Baker Street, the kind of London day that strips the fog from the city and leaves its bones showing. I found Holmes at his desk, a telegram before him, and the familiar blue swirl of his cigarette about his head. Mrs. Hudson's breakfast tray had gone cold at his elbow, untouched. He did not look up when I entered, but the thin curve of satisfaction about his mouth told me that for once the end of a case had pleased rather than exhausted him. "It is finished, then?" I asked, though I knew the question would rouse him more than the answer. He inclined his head. "In the formal sense, yes. The Home Office will see to Mr. Bracknell's resignation on health grounds by noon. Lestrade has his confession, though the man wrote it as though composing an abstract for a committee paper. Vale will be tried, but quietly, and the syndicate of informants will find their wires cut. As for Finch, he will vanish under the dust of some colonial appointment. The government is always generous with its tidy men. And Miss Pride?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Released and beyond reproach. Her statement has been enough to break Finch's chain of command. I have written a letter recommending her for a post at the Colonial Records Office. She has earned a living that will not dirty her gloves again." He rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the omnibuses crawled through the thawing streets. Men hurried to offices where truth was again a matter of ink and courtesy. "It is curious," he went on, "how murder and reform share a vocabulary. Both speak of necessity and sacrifice. Bracknell convinced himself that one man's death would steady the state, as if justice were a machine that required oiling with blood. I wonder how many such men sit in rooms like his tonight, persuading themselves that decency must sometimes be postponed." He turned then, and the quick glint of humour returned to his eye. "But come, Watson, the philosophical mood ill becomes a practical man. There is still one loose thread." He tapped the telegram. "Rowe, our unfortunate compositor, was found attempting to destroy his last set of proofs before the Yard arrived. Among them was a page Quill had copied, the one he died to preserve. Would you care to see the paragraph that caused so much commotion? He passed me the sheet, its edges still faintly scorched. In Quill's careful hand it read, "No nation remains secure when truth is sold by the ounce. The man who trades information betrays not the state, but the people who believe the state their servant." I looked up. "That was all?" "All," said Holmes softly. 12 words that might have passed unnoticed in any leading article had they not touched a nerve of hypocrisy too close to home. The irony, my dear Watson, is exquisite. Quill wrote what every honourable man knows, and yet it was enough to unmask those who did not believe it. For a time we were silent. The fire had sunk to a soft glow, the only sound the tick of the clock. At length Holmes drew his dressing-gown tighter and stretched in that loose, almost boneless way of his. "You will write it, of course," he said. "You will call it the case of the ink-stained glove. There is a moral in it somewhere, though I fear the public will look only for the chemistry." I laughed. "They always do, but tell me, Holmes, do you ever tire of such cases, when the motive is not greed or passion, but something cold and abstract like policy?" He gave me one of those looks, half amused, half distant. "My dear fellow, those are the only cases worth pursuing. A jealous husband or a dishonest servant can always be explained by appetite. But when the mind itself becomes the instrument of evil, when logic turns traitor to conscience, that is a foe worthy of the chase. Men like Bracknell are not devils, they are surgeons who have mistaken the knife for the cure. It is my task to remind them that the knife cuts both ways." There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with the post, her expression one of long-suffering tolerance. Holmes took the uppermost envelope, slit it, and scanned the page. Then he smiled, one of those rare, quiet smiles that humanized him utterly. "It appears," he said, "that Sir Lionel has invited us to dine at his club. He insists upon toasting our public service. I shall decline, of course. The air of Whitehall gives me a rash." "And Miss Harbury?" I ventured. "She returns to the country," Holmes replied. "There are some wounds that only distance can heal. Still, I think she will read Mr. Quill's words some day, and remember that courage comes in quieter forms than vengeance." He moved to the mantel and stood gazing into the coals. The light caught his face, carving it into planes of thought and shadow. There is justice enough in that, perhaps. The world seldom rewards the dead, but it occasionally remembers them. For a moment I watched him, the keen outline of his features softened by the fire. It struck me, not for the first time, that Holmes lived at a height too rarefied for the rest of us. His triumphs never wholly victories, his satisfactions more intellectual than human. And yet, in that brief flicker of warmth, I fancied I saw something like pity cross his expression. "You are thinking of Quill?" I said. "I am thinking," he murmured, "of how often truth dies from tidiness. The glove, the ink, the bell. Each was a symbol of order. Yet it was disorder, a single human error, that revealed them. It is always so. The universe loves imperfection. It is the crack that lets the light in." He turned sharply then, as if shaking off the reflection, and reached for his violin. The first notes came low and contemplative, like breath drawn over glass. "Watson," he said between phrases, "I am expecting a caller from Paddington presently, a trivial matter of a stolen birdcage, but I dislike idleness. Do stay for luncheon." I smiled. "And so another adventure begins." "Adventure?" He lifted an eyebrow. "Hardly. Merely a detail in the grand ledger of human folly." Yet his eyes gleamed with that restless joy which no fog, no intrigue, and no official silence could ever quite extinguish. The bow rose and fell, the melody deepened. Outside, London went about its noisy commerce of secrets, while inside 221B Baker Street the music of deduction played on, serene, inexhaustible and, for the moment at least, at peace.